My name is John Donahue. I'm an environmental consultant and a member of the New Jersey Highlands Board of Directors. Um, Many of you already know I was the former superintendent of Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area for almost 15 years. Spent 38 years with the National Park Service and 24 of those as a superintendent. Just so you know, I was also a environmental protection specialist, a resource management specialist, and I started out as a gardener. So I want to introduce my colleagues. Mr. Jonathan Wall is a psychologist and he's a member of our steering committee, the Committee of the Alliance for the Delaware River National Park and Lenape Preserve. And Jacqueline Wolf-Tice, who is also a member of the steering committee and is an adjunct professor at the Oklahoma University Indigenous Law Program. And she's been studying and working with Indigenous law for more than 30 years. So I'm going to start with a PowerPoint, and then each of my colleagues is going to talk, and hopefully we'll address every possible issue that you could have on your table. So, Delaware River National Park and Lenape Preserve. This is a sustainable vision for our national heritage in the Delaware River, a place that provides the opportunity to be inspired by nature, by history, and by culture. So first off, I wanted to talk about who we are, the Alliance for the Delaware River National Park and Lenape Preserve. This is a grassroots citizen effort. It has nothing to do with the government. We are not the National Park Service. We don't want you to think that we are. Government agencies don't comment on legislation, pending legislation, or proposals like this. So, and most national parks owe their existence to citizens, to motivated citizens and citizen groups, and not to the bureaucracy itself. Some good examples: Delaware Water Gap. Everybody knows Nancy Shakaitis and the story of the citizens there that stopped the valley from being flooded. Another good example is Everglades. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. Of course, John Muir and all the parks that he helped create. So for the past year and a half, we've been engaging citizens, doing Zoom sessions, listening to what people say, and really learning from all the different constituencies. Every meeting that we've had has resulted in good ideas that we've added to our proposal. And describing what we're going to do here today, I'm going to describe what our proposal is, where it takes place, and why. This, another point I want to make is that everything that we say is based on some kind of report, some kind of statistics, or documents from the government, from the National Park Service, from the USGS, various places. We're not making anything up. We're not predicting things. We're not projecting. We'll leave that to others. So this is from the foundation document of Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area. Every park got a foundation document during John Jarvis's tenure as director. And it says the purpose of Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area and the Middle Delaware National Scenic and Recreational River is to preserve the natural, cultural, and scenic resources and values of Delaware River Valley and provide opportunities for resource-based recreation, education, and enjoyment in close proximity to the most densely populated region of the nation. And I highlight that because that goes all the way back to the original legislation. You can read the same idea right in the legislative history from Congress and in the comments from President Johnson on the day he signed the law. They talked about providing recreational equity for the 60 million people now, at that time, 30 million people who were 15% of the American population right in this area. And that's something you can check yourself. So why should it be the Delaware River National Park and Lenape Preserve? These are singularly spectacular resources found here, which includes the longest undammed river in the eastern United States, Delaware River, the Kittatinny Ridge, which is a migratory highway, and the northern terminus of many species, the southern terminus of many others. The area contains 12,000 years of documented human occupation, and all that within the homeland of the Lenape people. It sits also at the center of hundreds of thousands of acres of connected public lands in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and all of that 85 miles from New York City. That is special. And as President Johnson said when he signed the legislation, this national park, and that's what he called it, will be within a day's drive of 15% of the American population. The park was always meant to provide recreational equity and parity to those now 60 million people that are that close to the park. And those people deserve to have a national park. This place meets every criteria of a national park and is recognized as much as anyone else in the country does. The Lenape Preserve will continue to not only preserve all the traditional activities, including hunting, but it'll actually enhance many. So continuing with that idea, this place is at the center of landscape scale connectivity. It's the keystone of protected natural landscapes. When you look at the connections to the Delaware State Forest and all the public lands in Pennsylvania, and the federal lands, and then the river, and then the federal lands and the state, New Jersey state lands are all intricately interwoven on the New Jersey side. It comes out to hundreds of thousands of acres of protected land, all within a short drive of one of the most densely populated areas in the country. There's many plant and animal populations that are more stable and secure because they can inhabit this unfragmented landscape, supporting increased biodiversity. Adding the national park status to some of this river and land will add greater protection to the resources. And I'm going to get specific about what those greater protections are. The ecological integrity of the river is dependent upon the protected and managed landscapes in the 3,500 square mile Delaware River watershed. So what is the proposal? The proposal is to take the existing federally owned lands in the national recreation area and to divide them up. 9,760 acres is what is shown on the map that we put out for the public to look at. And that comes out to between 13 and 14% of the existing DWA. It will become a national park in this proposal. This designation, according to the National Park Service, you can go on the nps.gov and check it out, or the Congressional Research Service and look at their definitions, provides the highest level of protection there is for any public lands in our country. The great majority of the existing federal area, over 56,000 acres, will become the preserve, which is a designation that the definition is that it's just like a national park. It's normally adjacent to or surrounding a national park, but it's a place where Congress allows consumptive uses. In this case, that would be hunting. And a preserve, and I was the superintendent of Big Cypress National Preserve in Florida, which is 725,000 acres. A preserve is a better way to protect hunting rights. Because even though DWA is a shall have hunting park, the legislation comes in, either you shall have hunting or you may have hunting. It still leaves a lot of discretion for the agency to determine when and where that hunting takes place. And in a preserve, this legislation that we're proposing could enshrine those rights in a more protective way. It could also allow for changes that the states like to make. One of the big things that's been coming out is Sunday hunting. This would allow Sunday hunting to take place in the preserve if the National Park Service determined that that was appropriate, but still allow everybody else who's non-hunter to enjoy the 9,700 acres on Sundays or every day of the week. This proposal continues all traditional uses. There's no impact on fishing, zero. People have said that. I am not aware of any national parks that don't have fishing, no impact on boating. And we believe that the local economy is going to benefit from having more people come and that those people are going to spend more money. So, and one thing I want to be clear is we don't believe they're all going to come on the same day. So there's been a lot of questions and concerns that we've heard over the past year and a half, and I want to go through some of them and talk about it. Some people have talked about a potential toll through the park. You know, the National Recreation Area has what they call amenity fees. So places where they provide bathroom and water, they charge a fee. And just this year, what used to be camping along the river, which was always free in the past, is now being charged $16, and you have to make a reservation online. But, you know, I also want to make the point that nothing is actually free. When we say it's free to us, what we're saying is the taxpayers are paying for it. So closure, and also, this proposal has no effect on fees. It doesn't matter if it's a national park, a national recreation area, a national seashore. The agency has a process through which they determine if and when they add fees and if and when they increase fees. And it doesn't matter what the designation is. And we are also sensitive to this issue. So now we're going to include in our proposal a prohibition on adding any new entrance fees. And that should resolve that situation. People have speculated that it would bring about the closure of Federal Road 209, which, is a regularly used road. But the transfer deeds from Pennsylvania to the United States prohibit that from ever happening, because in the deeds and in the analysis by the Attorney General at the time, Peter French, it specifically says if the road is ever closed to traffic, then it will revert to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So that's just a non-starter. It's not possible. People are, you're making believe that visitation is not increasing now, that the national park idea will increase visitation, but it's not increasing now. That's ludicrous. The National Park Service reported a couple of weeks ago, their figures were 400,000 more than 2 years ago. That has nothing to do with designation, because there has been no designation change. That's just simply what we can expect as we move forward. Increased traffic, there may very well be increased traffic if there are more people. But the thing about DEWA that's wonderful is that there are 85 legitimate entrances to the park. So that can be spread out, and any improvements needed can be made, because people aren't going to come here in huge numbers overnight. Now, why do I say that? Because it's been steadily increasing for decades. Potential resource impacts. This is another one. The infrastructure is already inadequate, and it has been for a long time. And I'm going to talk about the specifics of the infrastructure and the costs involved. But they recently did a visitor use management plan about 2 years ago. It had public hearings. It was adopted. It started when I was the superintendent. I was able to fund a lot of research from Clemson and other places as a result of the monies that we had from the power line settlement. So the basis of the visitor use management plan that they put in is that not having enough places for people to go leads them to just break through the brush and the forest and set up camp along the riverside where there are no bathrooms, where there is no garbage collection, and not having plans and preparation for these people coming is the greatest threat to the resources there is. It's a lot more threat than a road that's repaired or a parking lot that's put in. You have to wrestle with this mouse every time it moves too fast for me. So there, as a result of this proposal, there's no impacts. It doesn't create fees. In fact, like I said, we're now calling for the prohibition of an entrance fee in perpetuity as part of this legislation. It does not include state lands. These are all federally owned lands and simple fee. If you have an in-holding of private property, it wouldn't be affected. Your status within the park would continue just as it is now. It doesn't affect state regulations. It's not going to affect hunting regulations or anything else. And we did ask for additional lands to be authorized from willing sellers only. And the reason we did that was in response to hunting groups that indicated their main concern is the loss of any huntable acres. And we're sensitive to that. And we're talking about a 9,760 acre national park. And I estimate when you take out the areas where hunting is already prohibited, swimming beaches, campgrounds, the waterfalls, et cetera, it's probably going to be about 8,000 acres, lands that are no longer available for hunting. And we recognize that that's a significant contribution by the sportsmen. And I would like to say that while various sportsmen's groups have objected to that loss, and they have opposed the idea based on that, all of their comments have been civil and thoughtful and not based on any projection or anything that isn't actually factually in the proposal. People have talked about eminent domain. No use of eminent domain would be considered, and it hasn't been used since the very beginning. So 9,760 acres, national park, 56,000 plus acres of Lenape Preserve. And the breakdown is 5,703 acres in Pennsylvania, 3,862 acres in New Jersey. And the islands included 194 acres. The islands are normally claimed by one state or other. I'm not sure at this point exactly which states are involved, but we're only talking about 194 acres of islands. So they're relatively small. So let's talk about some of the benefits to the resources from the Delaware River National Park and Lenape Preserve. The first thing it would do is, from the national park section, it would remove the authority to manipulate habitat. Now, Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area is one of the few places that I'm aware of that has the authority to manipulate habitat. What does that mean? Cut down forests to create open space. And that has been done normally in order to improve particular kinds of hunting, upland birds, various kinds of hunting. It's not explicit in any of the legislation that that's why their authority is there, but it's certainly implicit that that's the real reason. It would lower the number of acres in agricultural leases. So that would eliminate large amounts of pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizer that's used to maintain the no-till farming that takes place. And mostly all of the fields, not every single one, but mostly all of them are adjacent to the river. So this would further protect the river from potential pollution. It would stop the U.S. government from competing with private farmers and who need to, sell their corn and soybeans to make a living. So why does any park, I may ask you, need 3,000 acres of corn and soybeans? The preserve would still continue to have agricultural leases. They could even add more acreage. And what are we talking about? I believe that right now there's somewhere between 10 and 13 farmers involved in the agricultural lease program. And there are fields that are fallow. So those fallow fields could be put into agriculture if that was the decision of the agency. This would allow the restoration of native woodlands and wetlands. And that thereby would enhance the native wildlife and vegetation. It would enhance the carbon sequestration and ecosystem recovery resulting from restoring natural systems, vegetation, and wildlife. And frankly, this is projection. What I can tell you is there is another power line right away running directly across the entire park. It's owned by First Energy. That's a fact. And I believe that this national park designation would prohibit any future secretary from authorizing another power line, a mega power line like that. That's not a fact, that's an opinion. But I can tell you that people did try very hard to stop that mega power line from coming through, and with no success whatsoever. And in order for it to take place, let me see if I have this on the next one. Secretary Salazar not only had to approve additional rights of way that the power line did not have, what they owned, even though it had been there for more than 80 years, what they owned wasn't even large enough to meet the standards for a power line today, much less the 80-foot tall power line that they had at the time, much less the mega power line that's existing now in the park. I wasn't able to stop it, but I was able to make them pay. They set up a fund of $66 million, which the park is used for natural resources, acquisition of land, wetland restoration, et cetera, et cetera. And they still have money for cultural resources that they can spend in the future. So benefits, protecting the intact landscape will benefit not only the recreation area as it exists, but the public lands completely connected to it in the surrounding area. Forest restoration will add to the biodiversity of the area. The overall effect will enhance the resilience of the lands. It will add to the climate change adaptation possible and necessary in the coming years. The already existing migratory highway of the Kittatinny Ridge and all of the park, which is essential to the Northeast corridor of wildlife corridors and vegetation, will continue to be connected so that if, in fact, animals and plants need to migrate northward to higher altitudes, they'll be able to do that. And DEWA has always been listed as a critical part of those corridors. If you look at any landscape scale maps and projects, DEWA is a critical component of it. And this would add to that protection. Hunting in the preserve will actually benefit from being adjacent to and surrounding a national park. There's an article we have listed on our website from the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, and they directly say that there is no better hunting than in land surrounding a national park. The park serves as a nursery for the wildlife. And in fact, if you look at the map, which is posted on our website, delvalpark.org, you can see that the corridor of the national park is going to be relatively thin, not in any way going to impact or increase, let's say, white-tailed deer population density. The legislation that we would like would greater support enshrining hunting rights. That's one of our goals. We've been spending a lot of time talking to different hunting federations, sportsmen's groups, and hopefully we're going to find other projects to work with them on. So let's talk about money. Some people say it wouldn't help if you was a national park to get more money. I'm going to show you some facts, okay? DEWA is one of the big 8 in terms of infrastructure. So these 8 parks contain 60% of all the infrastructure in the national park system. And this is a list from the 2022 appropriation. DEWA got 10 million, they had over 4.1 million visitors. Gateway got almost 27 million with 9 million visitors. Glacier, 15 million, 3 million visitors. Golden Gate, 507 million with 14 million visitors. Grand Canyon, 23 million, 4.5 million visitors. Same as DEWA last year, or this year. Great Smoky, 20 million, 14 million visitors. Yosemite, 31 million, 3.3 million visitors. And Yellowstone, 37 million with 4.7 million. And I can tell you as another fact, Grand Canyon, Delaware Water Gap, the same number of miles of road, the same number of buildings, and approximately the same amount of visitation. DEWA used to always surpass Grand Canyon, but apparently they have gotten a lot more visitors these past couple of years. So those are the actual budgets. Now, some people have projected that you wouldn't get any more money just because it's a national park. And the National Park Service isn't going to say, yes, we give these children more than we give those children. You really have to dig into the book to find the facts. The Green Book is what they call the budget, the operation of the national park system. And what we're looking at here, these are facts, not the complete NPS budget, but the part that goes to parks, because they also have tax programs. There's all kinds of programs that go into the multi-billion-dollar National Park Service budget. But here we have $2,688,287,000 that goes to parks. It's 63 national parks, 359 other units. So if you look at that money, 510 billion and change to the 63 national parks, it averages out to about $8 million. Some of these parks like Yellowstone, 37 million, other parks, smaller budgets, but those 63 parks get an average of $8 million appropriations. The other 359 units, 2,167,000,000, et cetera, averages closer to $6 million. So I don't know how anybody could tell me that national parks don't get more money than national recreation areas. Sure, there's a couple of national recreation areas, Golden Gate, Gateway, they have very big budgets. They also have the Senate Majority Leader or the Speaker of the House submitting their budget requests, which doesn't hurt. So clearly national parks get more money per unit than other destinations. And National Park Service isn't going to say that, they're going to say all the units, all the children in the family are the same. They are the same in some ways. In other ways, they're not. You might have 2 kids, maybe you think one needs to go to trade school and the other one should be at Harvard. That's your choice. So there are, I just said that. So the GAO, the Great American Outdoors Act, which is a tremendous piece of legislation, it's one of the aims is to reduce the maintenance backlog for the national park system. But this year, the appropriation was 169 million. The backlog at Delaware Water Gap is somewhere between 149 and 169 million. So clearly, now you're going to divide that up amongst 400 and something parks. It's not going to solve the problem with DEWA. All right, so DEWA, this is the economic contribution of the existing recreation area to the surrounding area. Directly, $163 million in visitor spending. And this you can look at on nps.gov. You can go and look at the economic reports, which are put together, I think, by the visitation by the Park Service, the economic reports by the USGS. And they're saying the economic output indirect is 260 million. And yes, we do believe that will increase when we create the National Park and Preserve. So the other thing is the people, right? Those 15% of Americans that this place was created to provide nature-based and history-based recreational opportunities for. 60 million now, 30 million when President Johnson signed the law. In the most densely populated part of the country, where we have no national park. You would have to drive to Virginia, to Shenandoah, or to Acadia. The entire Northeast, the only national park is Acadia. And it's been a national park for a very long time. So there's 42 million people in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, but no national park. And of the 63 national parks, I have a typo there, it says 64. Only 9 are in the eastern United States. So not everyone has the resources or time to travel to Yellowstone or other parks in the West. I grew up in Brooklyn. We didn't have a car. And when I first joined the National Park Service, I listened to the stories from every superintendent that talked about how their parents would drive them out to Yellowstone every year. We didn't have a car. I did get to go to New Jersey once. We took the bus. So this is a matter of outdoor equity for those 60 million people. And a lot of those folks, especially along the I-80 corridor from Long Island through New York City, through New Jersey, they do come to the park and they do use the amenity area in a big time way. Come with families, they come early in the morning. So here's some links that we have. You can find on our website, and we have frequently asked questions here available for you today. We have cards with our website on them, and we have pamphlets to help you see some of the other benefits, etc. And we're going to ask you again to visit our website, delvalpark.org. And I'm going to let this, I'm going to shut this off. I do want to say a few more things if I could. Hopefully you're not too tired of listening to me yet. So this is, the Alliance is a group of citizens and 23 organizations. 3 of those are Sierra clubs from New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, but the other 20 are not. We did have a colleague from the Appalachian Mountain Club who was going to be here today, but unfortunately she got COVID. She wasn't able to join us. So I think with that, we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jacqueline Wolf-Tice, who's going to talk a little bit about our contacts with tribal nations and some of the other groups that she's worked with.
Jacqueline, first thing I'm going to do is just acknowledge my ancestors, acknowledge this land that we are on, Lenape, and acknowledge that the many ancestors that went through this land in good ways, that hold this space, existing tribal bodies that hold this space sacred. So every time you come to this beautiful land that is in here for many these people developed like I was. And remember those that were. And as we talk about these things today, we're talking about the grandmother, we're talking about the Mother Earth, we're talking about all the relatives that exist within everything that you see. So when we look at these photographs of beautiful, river and in this area that we posing to redesignate as to a greater protection is doing so in respect, and acknowledgement, and recognition of those who were here before we were here, those who are here now protecting this land, and those in the future to come, because we want to do that. We want to make sure that we be conscious that we are not just focusing on sort of the financial stuff, just focusing on traffic, just focusing on kind of like our own sort of disturbances to our lives because of these things. I want to think further. Think about those ecosystems that exist in that river and those beautiful four-leggeds that walk around those and those sacred spaces that are there. So in that way, this is the spirit with which we are pursuing a proposal in a way of respect and honor of all these things. And so my own participation here, I think I came over in March. I was asked to come in March, or was invited to, if I would want to that's just intersecting some of the tribal communities that are descendants of the Lenape Hopi. So we started this, and I want to speak about a couple different things that are sort of contestations that exist within the structure of relationship as it is federal Indian law and policy into tribal communities. So essentially, there are levels of recognition within the federal government. These are what we call federally recognized tribes. In the context of federally recognized tribes, you have what is an explicit government-to-government relationship. This has been held in statutes, held in court cases throughout time. It's also been challenged by those in those contexts as well. But there are 574 federally recognized tribes in the Fertile Islands here. We have also another level of recognition that occurs tribal partners, and that's called state recognition. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it very easily. And in those recognition relationships, the state basically decides that it's going to extend to tribal communities what the federal government will not. Now, the reasons for the federal government not recognizing an existing tribal community are many. There's a very long list of regulations by CFR Part 83 that lists what tribal communities have to go through in order to be recognized as a government-to-government way, and therefore a tribe will become eligible for all kinds of programs, all kinds of financial help, all kinds of it's a vast array of benefits that come with a federally recognized. There are also limitations on it as well, because all of your land becomes trust, held in trust by the government. You have a reservation, and Indian country essentially is, there are 3 designations for Indian country by its definition in 751, but essentially, your land is held in trust, and that means that federal government, is the owner of the land essentially, and the tribe, by the law, occupies them. This is what tribes deal with. This is what's been going on since the discovery doctrine was put into the context of our laws. It was happening prior to that with the dispossession of the land and the removal, but by the context of law, the Johnson v. McIntosh case of 1823, where Chief Justice Marshall said, tribes, Indians, members of tribes are occupants. So this is, imagine that you are you're making treaties with a government. You have opened your space, and that's what comes down from the highest court. So I say all these things to tell you my positionality, which is that I'm here to hear what's going on and to be inclusive of of Indigenous voices. And we all need to be inclusive of the Indigenous voices. And within this Lenape Hoking, there are federally recognized tribes and state recognized tribes, and there are also tribal communities that don't have any state recognition at all. Many communities that are Lenape descendants. So in that way, as a private citizen group, no one can control who we talk to or who we don't talk to, right? We're not the federal government. Federal government, as I'm going to tell you in just a few minutes, has secretary orders, EOs, has statutes that govern how they must communicate with tribal communities and how they must honor sacred sites, how they must it's statutorily mandated. And so, but for us, we are a community group. We're a group of volunteers. He asked me because I have, who I am. I have who I am to be able to talk and to be able to hopefully make good relations. That's what I like to create. And not only good relations here, but good relations between separate tribal communities who are maybe seeing each other differently than they ought to be seen. So, but again, you can't control everything, right? So you do your best and you talk to everybody. And that's what we're doing. So I will tell you that just a couple of things just about statutes and such, and a couple programs that are going on. We did go down and meet with Chuck Sams. Chuck Sams, I work for the University of Oklahoma College of Law for the Indigenous Peoples Law Program. And so Chuck Sams, who is the director of the National Park Service, he went through our program a few years ago prior to COVID, and right at the beginning of COVID, he then became the director of their COVID response. He's Cayuse and Walla Walla. He's from the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Reservation out in Oregon. And he is just a wonderful person. I got to know him through our program. And when COVID hit, he got very busy and everything. But, the whole story, Deb Collin became our Secretary of the Interior, and she heard about him and she called him. And so his name was put up there with everybody else's. They had about 5 people here. And he had gone through this program. So he said to us, that was what gave me the extra leg up. So good for you, I thought it was great. But we went and met with him specifically about this issue around the discrepancy that can exist between the federal government consulting with federally recognized tribes, but not consulting with state recognized tribes. Like, that was the thing I wanted to go to him about as a citizen working in this context and working on communicating with all tribal communities of different designations. And he said a couple things to us that we were really happy with. One of the things he said had to do with just the fact that the way that the intersection of tribal communities and the federal government is being approached now is from a much more active place, much more inclusion of Indigenous voices. Traditional ecological knowledge is now being sought as a way to be, honoring of the government to government relationship, and also the spiritual and the cultural environment that is material. It's material. I mean, I call it spiritual and cultural, but it's a material connection to the land, not up here. It's here. And so there's a couple things that are going on in addition to the executive orders that exist. One is called 13007, and that was signed by Clinton, addressing Indian sacred sites and accommodating the access to ceremonial spaces, to ceremonial objects, and to basically avoid any kind of desecration of those places. Now, there have been examples where tribal entities have had to go to court around these things, and that's for sure. But in the context of the national park, we are in a good position at this time to write these things into legislation because they exist. Okay, so I mentioned Executive Order 13007 and 13175, which has with consultation, but recently Deb Holland and Secretary Vilsack of Agriculture issued something called EO 3403, which basically extends the inclusion to non-federally recognized tribal communities in the consultation process and in the process of sustainable practices we already know that, you know, indigenous communities are at the front lines for, you know, essentially losing the most when it comes to climate change, the deforestation that's going on. Their tribal communities on the front lines. Tribal communities need to be protected. And so I believe that within the context of the present order, you know, the implementation of it is really just beginning. But I believe that we can confidently expect, right? I mean, I'm just being truthful. We can confidently expect that there will be procedures that we can count on to help to facilitate these consultations and these sharing of knowledge, if that's what the tribal partners want. There are 4 parks in the national park system that have co-management authorities. We spoke specifically to Director Sams about co-management. And he basically told us about Canyon de Chelly, he told us about Glacier Bay National Park, about Grand Portage and Big Cypress, actually, have co-management. There's also at Acadia, and this was something that I just found out recently, that the Wabanaki nations are gathering sweetgrass within the park. So they're involved in this multi-year project where they're actually working with the park to ensure that they can gather medicine. And that is very, to me personally, you know, I mean, really it's happened in a lot of spaces already, but we don't hear about it necessarily. Because I know that, you know, my relatives that are in North Dakota go out to the national park and they you know, they take the medicines, you know, in a good way, you know what I mean? It's federal land, yeah, but there is protections for these things. So these are just very, you know, kind of like just a small snapshot. Then the Squally tribe at Mount Rainier is also working with the NPS to publish a report. The report is called Plants, Tribal Traditions, and the Mountain Practices and Effects of Nisqually Tribal Plant Gathering at Mount Rainier. So there are efforts and exercises of working together with the national park as a way to elevate the value tribal communities knowledge that is, of course, everything, you know, nothing happens without consultation, nothing. It's not going to happen in terms of like plants. Nobody's going to go pick the plant and write about it if a tribal nation says, you know, we're not going to do that. You know? So these are voluntarily entered into by tribes because, you know, what I found is that, you know, like the bottom line, sort of baseline belief of relationality, the sense of connection and of interrelationship with all of nature, it really does extend into our human family. And so that idea of trust, building trust between people, like that needs to happen. And the government of the United States of America broke every treaty, over 470 treaties. They were all broke for the most part, right? So here we are. It's no wonder that there can be suspicion. There should be always be checked. You know, hear what somebody said, but verify. It's always a good idea. Yes, my brother just told me a joke about that, but I won't tell you, it's a really good one. But I'm really bad at telling jokes. It's, believe me, it has to do with verifying and like checking and votes. But anyway, but the thing is, I just want to say that these efforts are, you know, that's what I'm doing here, and these efforts are done in a good way. And I really welcome anybody to come and talk to me afterward.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Jonathan, I'm going to see if I can pull the map up while you're talking.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. I'm going to be talking about a few different things, social justice, social equity. You notice most of us are whites in this room. My job is to try to enlist other community groups, ethnic groups to try to join in the process. For everybody to have a voice in this matter, Jacqueline, that's a strong part of her social justice and environmental justice efforts as well. In her communities that she's in touch with. Children who experience nature today are going to vote to protect it tomorrow. Try and protect the areas that we love from too many people might backfire on us. What we need to do is proper management of those lands. 50 years ago, you wanted to see the great sequoias, you drive up your truck right up onto the roots, march around, a few thousand people, and which is better off today when you have a platform that goes around, you have millions of people walking around that tree, or back then you have the carving names of the tree and have some friends break off some limbs and take home the souvenir. I mean, everything comes at a cost. There's always a risk to everything. And we've been talking to some of the local people in the groups. Some people have been embracing this and been favorable. Some people have not. And some of their fears are pretty consistent. And John Donahue has addressed some of those fears in terms of hunting, that the wealth of this area is going to be turned over to 4% of the hunters who can use it, not to the vast majority of people who are going to be hiking it and picking it. That's for certain, for understandable reasons, for previous relationships and to foster trust. We've had very cordial relationships with a number of the hiking groups who come and organizations who have come. They don't necessarily agree with us yet. We're still on the fence. But they've heard us respectfully. They've taken our concerns. We said, they're going to be addressing them with us in the future. But some of the other concerns is not just hunting, but the impact on our hamlets, the towns around it. That hordes of people, the fear. And if I was and local in the sense not that far of a drive to get to the park. But as far as people who live in the immediate area, they're concerned. They're very concerned, and rightfully so. I would want those folks to do is to fight fiercely for their interests. I want the people who have a passion for this environment to fight fiercely. I want them to do it with respect to those they might disagree with, and to come with an open mind and be able to change their opinions when given facts and try to negotiate and work and try to provide for the best of this area, for environment, for this very, very important biosphere area. In terms of the remedies, I see it as to have higher levels of federal government intervention without making it into a national park. In terms of anybody here be in favor of, if you're concerned about people visiting the area, about the influx of people building around the towns, or the Indian artifact, or I should say the First Peoples artifacts in those areas of Yellowstone. And you folks say, well, national parks are bad. I want to make it into a recreation area. Anybody here want to make Yellowstone into a recreation area? Or Mesa Verde, the Pueblo cliff villages? Because before it was turned into a national park, and I believe it was 1908 when Theodore Roosevelt saw how imperative it was. That the local people, some of them were in favor of it, but many of them were against it. And they were going in and destroying the Indian artifact, the First People artifact. They needed federal oversight in order to protect the individual interests of those areas and of the cultural interest. Now, we can talk about the hypocrisy of federal government. I agree with you. There's a lot of it, and Jacqueline can go on for hours talking about how they've broken trust. But there's also, we can talk about that at length also as to how to ensure. And the national park has made a strong effort in trying to protect and advocate now for protecting First People artifacts. As far as hunters are concerned, that hordes of hunters are going to come in, and it's going to impact on the hunting and the loss of acreage of some of the fields in the area. I'm not a hunter. Homer Flood is my only experience of hunting is watching him. But to me, Pennsylvania and the eastern part of Pennsylvania has 30 deer per square mile on it. Ideally, should have 5, certainly no more than 10. And things get bad after 15. It's a serious problem in northeastern Pennsylvania. There's plenty of deer. I mean, if you're not interested in hunting, you're just interested in deer harvesting. You want to guarantee every maybe once out of every 4 times you go out hunting, you're guaranteed a deer. I guess you'd want those type of things. But it's not good for the environment. It's not good for the understory. It's bad management. Now, that's 30 deer per square mile in Pennsylvania. Those could be searches from Field and Stream was just, I got that number from. In New Jersey, 60 to 200. They're devastating our woodlands, New Jersey. Now, when you're talking about too many people are gonna say predict. There's more people gonna come if it's not part, you're right. That is a concern. Okay. But you know what? You don't have to predict the future or know the future too much to know it's gonna get real bad real soon if it stays as a recreation area. Why? In White Township, Jandal, there's a massive warehouse project. Two warehouses, totaling 2.6 million square feet are proposed on 580 acres in New Jersey. Massive. That's gonna bring in tons of trucks, going up to Route 80. Those truckers have to have a place to live. You're gonna have all the support services for those warehouses. Shake your head, no, but it's a serious problem. In Phillipsburg, there's another warehouse. They're building tons of them already. It's been built. There's no one right along Delaware River. If you're worried about the Delaware River, instead of fighting this redesignation, you should be out there, trying to get to these warehouses. It's trying to stop them being built along the Delaware River, heating up the water. Upper Mount Bethel, River Point Logistics. Did you ever hear about that doozy? The largest manufacturing on the East Coast, 6 million square feet. Taking over where the old power plant is that was right on the river. We finally clear that nets off. We could perhaps, take that eyesore and just keep it and preserve it and enhance it. That's already a done deal. I don't know if you can even find that. I've been told it's just a done deal. That's gonna bring tons of people in that area. Milford, you have new feeder roads, you have hospital expansions, you have stores and hotels. A massive warehouse already operated by Georgia Pacific. Another one is being proposed. I believe, hopefully, they're successfully fighting it that's on the aquifer. But there's another one, I understand, that further up the river, they're gonna blow half a mountain away and wanna put one in there. The place is under assault. Do you wanna say is, a lot of people are gonna come if it's enough, yeah. But you know what's gonna be is tons of people are coming. They're coming. And that's the reason why I got involved in this. I don't care about a name change. I care about trying to preserve that in biosphere and the future. New York to Scranton train. That Amtrak line is due to be built in a few years. It's a done deal. It's coming through. It will be stopping in Mount Bethel. You don't think there's gonna be private contractors with vans showing up, I don't know what time, 8:30 in the morning and saying, we're gonna drop you off in different areas of that recreation area, dumping them off along the river, no facilities, proper facilities. You can turn a blind eye, no national park, but there's consequences for that. There's serious consequences for not looking at the facts. There's the power line right away, still exists as recreation area. We can try to fight it as a national park. That ain't going through. I can't predict the future. We all think the Cox Island Dam project is finished, kaput. Yeah, I think a 95 probability it'll never get built. But global warming, what happens if Western Pennsylvania and Ohio go through 20, 30 years of severe drought? And we're getting overflooded, massive overflooding in the Delaware from microstorms. Do you think some engineer might think that's a good idea to the approach? I think as a national park, doesn't guarantee that can never be undone, but it makes it harder. I believe that master plans have to be developed. View sheds need to be protected. Private farms outside the park is preserved. And I think a national park service with an army of scientists, hydrologists, botanists, environmentalists, geologists, archaeologists, they need to measure and protect the issues and concerns scientifically and protect these lands. Cultural finds must be protected. First people rights need to be recognized. I think that's pretty much it, except for me to point out that, we all step around the issue of, the stranger coming to visit and people coming in from the inner city, coming to visit. These are federal lands already. They belong to all American people. The Black kid in Newark is going to grow up someday. If all he experiences is a pretty park in the city, will he vote to make sure monies are provided for national parks? The poor kid from Scranton who doesn't get to go and see Yosemite deserves to see a national park and to experience it. I think that's everything that I have.
Thank you, Jonathan. Let me have a final word before Elliot comes with the hook. I'd just like to, this was recently accomplished in West Virginia. So I'd just like to give you a couple of quotes from their congressional delegation. Redesignation of the National River to a national park and preserve will shine a brighter light on West Virginia and all that it has to offer and provide another catalyst for tourism and industry and local businesses. Senator Pepito. She's the Republican senator with Senator Manchin, and they did this together. The redesignation is a crucial step in reinvigorating our economy. It'll preserve and protect the New River Gorge for generations to come and make our state an even better place to work and raise a family. Representative Miller, the congressman. It's a real victory for prestige, title, and tourism dollars. One business owner said, "This is a way to keep your child or grandchild living in West Virginia." We hope that our congressional delegations in Pennsylvania and New Jersey will be as enlightened as the ones in West Virginia. Thank you.
You know, this is a very controversial subject, so appreciate everyone being civil as possible, and it's an opportunity to ask questions, not to make speeches. Yes, sir.
Yeah, can you please provide a specific example of protections that would be afforded to a national park that aren't currently under a recreation area or could not be implemented through legislative action or undone by legislative action?
I listed 2 pages in your presentation.
Can you please just provide one?
First of all, it would eliminate the authority to manipulate habitat within the national park portion. They could keep that in the preserve if they like. That would preserve the opportunity for forestry growth. It would diminish the amount of agricultural leases, eliminating pesticides, herbicides, eliminating fertilizers. It would allow the regrowth of native woodlands and wetlands and meadows, which would also enhance the biodiversity. It would, I listed 2 pages of presentation.
That are specific to national parks and couldn't be implemented in a national recreation area. Also, as a follow-up.
Yeah.
Culturally, I mean, we are at a river conference and farming is detrimental to river water quality, but it's also important to the cultural heritage of the park. How much acreage are you talking about? Is there none remaining in the national park? No agriculture at all? How much do you foresee? And could these restrictions for best management practice, such as organic farming and not allowing spraying of pesticides, maintain the cultural aspect of the Delaware Rotterdam recreation?
So the agricultural work is done on a no-till basis, which is specifically done to protect artifacts that might be used. But it requires a lot of herbicides, a lot of pesticides, and a lot of fertilizer to do that. The farming could continue in the National Preserve. In fact, they could add more if they wanted to, because in the portion where the National Preserve is, there's a lot of fallow fields. One of the things that always concerned me about trying to maintain open space through agriculture is that there really aren't a lot of people that want to farm nowadays in our area. It's not, most of the people, not most of them, all of the people that do the farming on leasing from the recreation area. It's a second job for them. It's a hobby. It's something they enjoy doing. It's one of the reasons we were looking into burning and other kinds of traditional ecological knowledge that might maintain some of that open space. So it wouldn't eliminate all farming if the Park Service wanted to continue doing it. It's a discretionary action right now.
Yeah, could you talk about the designation to a national park, what that would be for commercial logging on that land? Would the designation of the Delaware Gap, would that impede commercial logging? Or would that open up the national park to commercial logging, like you see out west?
Right. First of all, inside the national park, there would never be commercial logging, but there isn't commercial logging inside the recreation area. That's a non-issue in terms of designation.
So, okay, so by going with the national park designation, it would prevent commercial logging inside that 9,000 acre.
It would
area.
prohibit it forever, yes.
Okay, thank you.
How about logging for habitat manipulation or opening up the canopy? Would it allow mechanized tree removal and wood removal?
No, not inside the national park. If Congress determined that the preserve would continue to have the authority to manipulate habitat, they could continue to do it in there And the only reason that they actually do it is to create different kinds of hunting.
Nick?
Wouldn't the redesignation, being that there's no dam, there shouldn't be a recreation area, but anyway, wouldn't it call for more law enforcement rangers? In the beginning of the park, there was 37 or 39 law enforcement rangers. Now that it's a recreation area, more people are coming there. There's maybe a dozen. There's not too many law enforcement rangers all the time. There's not one station on the New Jersey side of the river. New Jersey frontier is wide open. So by redesignating a national park, we would get more law enforcement for the CFR regulations to actually manage it like a national park. Because the recreation area, although supposedly governed by the Organic Act, is really subject to landscape development schemes to accompany the recreation from the Denver Service Center. So would the national park status bring back not only Native Americans back to their homeland and hopefully jobs for them, federal jobs for Native Americans, but wouldn't it bring back more democracy to the local communities and the pride in having a national park in there? Like you said, it would definitely stimulate the local economy because of the prestige of the national park. So I mean,
So that's a lot to unpack, so why don't you start? First off, yes, I think that, and I'm not criticizing the National Park Service, but the situation now is there are no visitor centers open, even though there are two. There are no ranger stations in New Jersey. The rangers are sitting by the side of the road in their tent in the parking lot. And would the national park status, it would give us as advocates a greater opportunity and more leverage to get those increases. I mean, I think we've shown a lot of facts, and I think one of the benefits of this is that everybody that I've spoken to, opponents or proponents, all recognize that the park needs more money. And I think that we're all willing to continue trying to get that money. So Milford Township, in their letter of concern about this proposal, for the first time in my lifetime memory, asked the congressman to increase the budget of the park. I've never seen any of the towns surrounding the park before send a letter saying, please give them more money. So I think all of us as advocates for those resources, natural, cultural, would have much more leverage. And I can tell you just sort of inside baseball, I have sat at the table on many occasions where we talked about who was going to get the increases. And many people, park superintendents said, well, Shenandoah is the only park we have. We have to give them the increases first. You know, in those days, we had a Mid-Atlantic region and a North Atlantic region. Now Shenandoah and Acadia are in the same region. It goes from Virginia to Canada. So yes, I think that the economic situation in the park is dismal right now. They got a raise this year. Every unit of the national park system got a budget raise this year. And that's great. But as I think if you looked at those figures, comparing this to the other parks that have hundreds of miles of trail, hundreds of miles of road, hundreds and hundreds of buildings, millions of visitors, they all have at least twice as much money as Delaware Watershed. So yes, I think that the national park status it would only be the third national park in the entire Northeast region from Virginia to Canada. And yes, I think that would carry some weight. Is it an automatic thing? No. There's authorization, which is what would be creating the national park, would be authorization. And the authorization can say things like you fund this, you restore the native woodlands, you do this or that, but that's not money. And what one of our former directors, one of the National Park Service former directors, George Hartzog, was famous for saying, authorization without appropriation is conversation. And so, yes, we need to get the money, and I don't see why that isn't something we can't all work on together, regardless of how we feel about this designation. And yes, I mean, it's almost ludicrous, 4 million visitors, whether you want to say it's 3 million, 4 million, 5 million, whatever it is. I bet you they don't have 19 law enforcement rangers right now, including the chief ranger and the deputy. So, yes, and the other thing that's happened over the last decade, what they call FTE, full-time equivalency. So the amount of money people you're allowed to hire, regardless of how much money you have, has been cut. Because they said, well, you don't have any money, so I'm going to cut your FTE from 120 to 75. So that's 75 full-time people. Whether you divide that up into 50 part-timers, some seasonals, whatever, that's all you get. So, and that's the other limitation that's used in budgets as well. Yeah, we can give you more money, but you can't spend it. So those are the kinds of things that we can work on as advocates for those resources.
John, one more question from Commissioner Yardley.
Your presentation that you gave about surrounding development gave the impression that if this becomes a national park or a preserve, however you want to call it, that you're not going to have that development.
No, that's coming. That development is, that area.
That development is coming, so whether this is designated as a national park or not, it's coming no matter what.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
That's
So-
why anybody who predicts, oh, it became a national park, and all these people coming because of that. We're talking about huge investments of infrastructure money, commercial reasons, warehouses, everything else. It's gonna be, it's inevitable. It seems to me inevitable with, the massive projects that are being proposed right now.
I think
Go ahead.
no, the difference is you won't be getting warehouses, you'll be getting things to accommodate the existing tourism as it grows. So you don't build warehouses for visitors and tourists. So this development is development. So I recognize and I have quotes from the newspapers where a lot of people are against the idea of any more people coming. But like I said, I grew up in the city. I am more people. And I was happy to be able to come here. It's just a matter of sharing these wonderful resources that so many of us are able to enjoy. I live 2 miles from the boundary of the park. I'm not immune to the fact that, last couple of summers, there was hundreds of cars parked up and down 209, that people were coming here and walking 2 miles to get to the bottom of the hill, to walk another 2 miles up to the waterfall. And God bless them. They own these lands. They have the right to come here. And, I do think what you would see is instead of seeing warehouses all over the place, you would see the kind of development that would be good for our businesses. I'm not sure where you're from, but you obviously have businesses in your community. And I would think that, as a matter of fact, I think even the commissions, township supervisors and stuff that have come out with those resolutions saying, we're going to oppose this until you do this, this, and this. Well, we've actually demonstrated and answered all of the things they asked for in those resolutions. There's your map. And what I would ask you to do is look at what a small, tiny portion that we're asking for to be made into a national park. And 10 years ago, they asked for the whole thing to be national park. I advised them that was a mistake, that they shouldn't try to eliminate hunting. I was a government person, so I couldn't have a position, but I just told them, that's dead on arrival. You should look for a compromise. This is a compromise. And we've been working very closely with a lot of different sportsmen's groups. And you don't see them saying any of these nonsense things. They're just saying, we don't want to give up any hunting acres. And we're trying to work with them to see if we can accommodate that and find a way. And I think the answer is to find additional lands from willing sellers. And you can have in the legislation, no eminent domain allowed. You can address every one of the concerns that people have brought up. I know you said no, one more question, but this gentleman's been trying, and I see our fellow trustee, Chief Man, wants to say something. So, Let him go first, 'cause we want to hear him.
Tom and then Chief.
Well, I had a couple, but I guess the quickest one would be what the time. Best case scenario for.
From as soon as possible to as long as it takes. It's not unusual for legislation to take 5 years. But in West Virginia, I can tell you, it was probably 10 years ago, Senator Manchin tried to create it as a national park. Didn't fly. In this time, he had both senators, bipartisan support, congressional support. And it was NPCA that advised them to go with the route of National Park and Preserve, which is something, we had recommended 10 years ago around here as being a really good approach.
So take 5 years.
I mean, I can't really predict. That's one thing I was saying before. We don't predict, we
I
don't
understand.
project, we don't make up numbers. Everything we say is based on facts.
Chief Man?
Yeah, kind of shocked that I wasn't acknowledged for being in the room. Second of all, for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Chief Man, the Turtle Clan of Lenape, Lenape Nation, the Muncie speaking people, which is our territory, ancestral territories from the Raritan River north. So you could assume that even the mere name of Lenape Preserve is wrong. It's Lenape Preserve, Muncie, not Lenape. For two, the fact that you have 50-something thousand acres of preserve, even though it is a preserve, and even though it could be potentially a national park, that doesn't necessarily afford it all the protections that we all really do think, right? There's 500 and something active wells drilling in national parks right now. There is Big Cypress, where actually Mr. Donahue, you were actually quoted, I believe, in saying that, it was okay to access those reserves of oil that are beneath it. And that, that there would be no endangerment to the endangered species or to the water or the wildlife, to the indigenous people or their traditional ways.
I didn't say that.
Well, you were quoted in a paper saying.
I have an audio.
We're gonna have a conversation. First of all, I want to tell you, Elliot, at the very first thing he said this morning was his chief man here. And I don't think he or any of us recognize you here. But that was the first thing he said before he brought in the plenary speaker. So, and what I said regarding oil drilling was that is what the law required. The law of Big Cypress says you shall allow for the use and enjoyment of oil. That's what I never said it wouldn't affect endangered species or any of that other stuff.
I'm not attacking. I'm just making a point that even with those designations, there is no guarantee whatsoever that those things would not be allowed to happen.
The legislation.
To include the transmission of power, to include the transmission of oil or gas, right? And they will come in and they will affect that area. My biggest question to you all is how do you expect to mitigate the fact that I am not speaking on behalf of anybody else other than the Lenape Muncie speaking people, right, who are still here, right, regardless of any federal designation, state recognition, or anything else, right? We're more sovereign than a lot of people actually realize. And the lack of that acknowledgement, right, is a detriment, to this place. And that doesn't mean that you didn't take the time to reach out to me and we sat with you. That was true, right? But it's the continual consultation with people who are ancestrally are not tied to this place. Hence, we have the example of Lenape, right? And we had this conversation before, but to show you what I mean, right? Because it's another form of racism, right? Because we don't have federal recognition, but we don't sit here and have the conversation that's the fact that we already explained to you that if that was something that was gonna happen, which was at the restaurant, right? That very name should be corrected because it's a misappropriation, right? It's not Lenape, it's Lenape, right? It's Lenape is Muncie. That is this space that we occupy here, right? And it is all those different connections that makes it so that we have the opportunity to grow together, right? Because there shouldn't be a whole activism group on both sides of this trying to figure out as to why or whether or not we should accomplish this. There's many ways to continue to preserve that place. You know, talking about taking those fields, right, that have to be roller crimped and things like that, that they were there before too. They were there before Coxsackie, you know, showing all over the place, you know? So who should have the access to go in there and actually farm those parcels of land whose ancestors did once before, which is why the artifacts would be found in those areas, right? So how do you mitigate away, right, the fact that we, the indigenous people who never left this place, don't want that to happen? It just happens to be a coincidence that there's so many other people, counties, towns, legislatures, the legislation that's proposed by a will state, even though. How do you mitigate that away? You know, and what I see, unfortunately, is taillights. And I see that because of those other tribal communities around the country who have federal recognition, right? That somehow that's more enticing because they're not here, because they feel a certain way because we are. And you have to be able to mitigate that. My question really would be, how would you mitigate the fact that we, the indigenous people who are state recognized by law, right, that we don't want to see that happen? I mean, that's my bona fide question, right?
So you're speaking for all of the
I'm
Ramapo?
speaking for the Rempole Nation via
Not
the
the
turtle.
Lenape and not all of the.
I don't
tribes in New
speak for
Jersey.
I don't speak for the Nanticoke who are Nanticoke and Unami, and I do not speak for, you know, the Powhatans. I'm speaking on behalf of the Muncie speaking people, right, which is from the Raritan River north.
Right, and it was our intention, you know, not only to speak with you, but to speak with all the tribes in New Jersey and to speak with the federally recognized tribes and hopefully to speak with the groups that don't have recognition from anyone and to put together as much of a consensus as we can. And, I don't know what to tell you. I was very honored when we sat down with you and Mikey Picaro. And I thought that not that we had convinced you that you wanted to support this, but that we had established a rapport that would allow us to continue speaking and trying to investigate ways to mitigate concerns.
So that was created, or was there, and at a certain point in time, we felt that that door kind of closed. For whatever the reason, I don't even know that I could actually give the specifics to you right at this moment.
I would like to speak to that because I'm the one that's been,
If I could finish,
sure, finish what you're saying, but this seems like a
that's
dialogue
nice. If you
now.
say that I can finish and continue to talk, that's disrespectful.
Well, I'm just saying
I
that
can, and
it's been a dialogue here and I can address that very clearly because what you're saying isn't true.
What I'm saying isn't true, Mrs. Tice?
We hadn't been speaking to others at the time that you made that accusation. That's not true.
That I made what accusation?
We hadn't met with any others, that you felt like the door closed, but in fact,
No, see, Ms.
There
Tice, you didn't let me, Ms. Tice, you didn't let me finish speaking, which now I'm not going to. But because you didn't allow me to finish speaking and you kept speaking over Chief Mann, who is sitting here, right? You
Chief
didn't get
Mann.
to hear the rest of that.
you know,
Because I'm not a confrontational person unless somebody creates an expectation. And that person who's created that expectation is you, just now.
no, it's not.
Okay,
No.
you get your piece. Mr. Donahue, I think that we had a cordial conversation.
I thought we
Well,
did.
and Chief Man, I hope
And
that.
she's continuing to talk over me.
Hope we
You and I will
continue.
continue to have further conversation, but I can honestly say that there will be certain people who have to be excluded.
We have it. No.
Thank you, John.
I've reached out to you a couple times since all of this and you will not answer my calls. So I think there's just a personality thing going on here rather than a values
Personality?
thing. Yeah, I think there's a
Really?
personality.
So we can see, right, that Chief Man's sitting over here trying to be as cordial as possible. You claiming to be descent from whoever you are descended from, I don't argue with that, right? But you clearly cannot sit here and speak the way that you are and then show this disrespect.
I'm not
And if
being
you so choose to
disrespectful, sir.
continue to show that disrespect, then it'll be more than me that has things to say to you.
I really, and don't mean disrespect, but I cannot listen to accusations that aren't true without speaking to it. And that's what I'm saying.
You continue to offer those accusations, and I wasn't speaking to you, I was speaking to Mr. Donahue. And if I wanted to address something to you, I would have. Clearly, you have reached out to us, right? We don't know you. We don't know anything about you. And just because we can pick up a book and read about it doesn't mean anything. Who we do know is Mr. Donahue, who I sit on the board with the Highlands Coalition. I know him. We live here. We grew up together. We grew up next to each other. He understands the concerns. But when you're here and you're bringing concerns of people who did not grow up here, who don't have the authority, only because there is this big thing when people say Lenape, they think it includes all Lenape people from Delaware, Pennsylvania, state of New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. And in fact, it doesn't, because that's where history is wrong. History wants to make it so that there is just this one group when there was not. There was three. And we represent that northern half, the Muncie-speaking people. The people that are in Anadarko and in Bartlesville do not. The people who are in Wisconsin, that the Brotherton Reservation, the Stockbridge Muncie, the Kansas Muncie, the three reservations in Connecticut. Those are the people. Those are the people.
So I would just like to come and apologize.
There is no need.
Thank you all.